The Catholic Theological College teaches the Bachelor of Divinity degree and the Graduate Diploma in Theology degree as an offshore campus of the Catholic Institute of Sydney, a member college of the University of Notre Dame, Australia. In addition, we teach the Level 5 New Zealand Certificate in Christian Studies and the Level 6 New Zealand Diploma in Christian Studies. The degree certificates and diplomas are all NZQA registered. Enrollments are currently ongoing. Something new in 2022, the Graduate Diploma in Theology students can choose papers from the Bachelor of Divinity program or from the Religious Education course units at NQF Level 5 and 6. Also in 2022, we are offering once again the Graduate Certificate in Leadership and Catholic Culture as a joint offering with the Australian Catholic University. So once again, welcome to our pre-Christmas special. Growing up in the Philippines for me was particularly special during the Christmas season, which incidentally is celebrated once the month ends in B-E-R. So you start seeing Christmas decors and Christmas carols as early as September. Although my own kids had a completely different Christmas experience while growing up in the UK and here in New Zealand, nonetheless, one thing that is always present is, of course, Santa Claus. So who is Santa Claus? Tonight, Father Merv Duffy, our Assistant Dean for the Bachelor of Theology and the Graduate Diploma in Theology degrees, will introduce us to the saint behind Santa Claus. On behalf of the Catholic Theological College, we wish you all a blessed Christmas.
Thank you.
Give me the why I need it.
Right, we begin the saint behind Santa, and I'm going to take you to Turkey, to a place called Patara. And a long time ago, 270 AD, a young man called Nikolaos is born into a wealthy Greek family. Patara is a coastal town. You can see the Mediterranean Sea, and being part of a rich family, he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to the Holy Land, and he was a religious young man, and he lands up being ordained as a priest by his uncle, who was bishop of the town in which he was born. And then Nicholas lands up, Father Nicholas as he is then, lands up being chosen as the Bishop of Myra, another port town. Now, they are Christian, but Christianity is illegal at that time. Most of the time it's not persecuted, but there are persecutions from time to time. And in the early 300s, Bishop Nicholas was arrested as part of the persecution of Christians by Emperor Diocletian. So the Roman Emperor is out to discourage people from being Christian, and some of the leaders are arrested. And Nicholas is one of those in prison because of his faith and tortured. Then comes Constantine as emperor. So 313 AD, the two co-emperors of the Roman Empire declare that Christianity is now a tolerated religion, and those who had been arrested for being Christian are released. So think of a bit like Nelson Mandela. The people of the Christians of Myra were really proud of their courageous bishop. He was a confessor. He was one who had suffered for the faith. So you've got Christians proud of their bishop. In 325, Christianity makes another step of trying to get organized and trying to get united when an ecumenical council is called by Emperor Constantine in Nicaea in Turkey. And one of those people whose name is on that list of those who attended is Nicholas of Myra of Lycia. which was what Turkey was called then. And this is the council, and you can see this council worked in Greek, so Nicholas was right at home, that came up with our creed. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty. The creed we still say at Mass was worked out. There's a legend, the council was against Arius, the heretic, who was a priest. There's a legend that Nicholas punched Arius. Councils were more fun then than they are now. Eventually, Nicholas dies. Eventually, we all die. So 343 AD, Nicholas dies at the age of 73. And because he'd been such a good bishop, because he'd suffered for the faith, the people of Myra prayed at his tomb. And they referred to him as a saint. They said he was Saint Nicholas. He was the courageous bishop. He was the good bishop. And so they asked for healing from Nicholas. They asked for safe voyage from Nicholas. They prayed at his tomb. They left offerings at his tomb. So he becomes a local saint. And because he died on the 6th of December, that day in particular was celebrated as the Feast of Nicholas. Myra is a seaport, and one group who prayed to him were sailors, because the sea is dangerous and sailors are superstitious, and when they're in port, they're quite religious. And so we get evidence of what's referred to as the cult of Nicholas, of prayers to Nicholas and holy images of Nicholas. In the Orthodox Church, Nicholas gets the reputation of the wonder worker because of the miracles associated with his intercession. The first written evidence dates from the 8th century, but obviously there was devotion and prayers before that. And the oldest prayers we can find to Nicholas are for a safe voyage. So he's a saint of seamen. And he's pictured as riding on a white horse. Now, a white horse is a common attribute of deities associated with the sea, because the waves break in foam. So Poseidon and others who were sea gods and who you would pray to for a safe voyage are often shown riding a white horse. So Nicholas on a white horse may have been a natural attribute to give to a saint who protected seafarers. So here's a painting by Agnolo Gaddi, and you can see these are sailors in trouble. The storm has taken their mast down. They are praying desperately. Who turns up and takes the tiller of the boat and brings them home to a safe harbor? But Holy Bishop Nicholas. So they pray to Saint Nicholas for a safe voyage, and he saves them. Here again, sailors in trouble, and they pray because of the storm, and Nicholas appears and calms the storm. So if you're in trouble at sea, pray to St. Nicholas. Now, it's probably a logical extension of that, that if you are sending something by sea, that you should pray to Nicholas to look after it. And one of the major things that was transported across the Mediterranean was grain, because from Egypt, from Alexandria down in the south up to Rome was the annual grain supply. That's what was feeding Italy. And there's a legend about Nicholas which claimed that during a famine, he intervened to get food supplies for his city. And so here's the legend of the grain ships. There came a time when St. Nicholas's province was beset by a famine so severe that no one had anything to eat. The man of God learned that several ships laden with grain were anchored in the harbour. He hastened there promptly and begged the ship's people to come to the aid of those who were starving by allowing them 100 measures of wheat from each ship. But they replied, "Father, we dare not, because our cargo was measured at Alexandria, and we must deliver it whole and entire to the emperor's granaries." And the saint replied, "Do what I tell you, and I promise you in God's power that the imperial customs men will not find your cargo short." The men did so, and when they arrived at their destination, they turned over to the imperial granaries the same quantity of grain that had been measured out at Alexandria. They spread news of the miracle and glorified God and his saint. Meanwhile, the grain they had relinquished was distributed by Nicholas to each according to his needs, and so miraculously that not only did it suffice to feed the whole region for 2 years, but it supplied enough for the sowing. And so in this artwork, you can see Nicholas on shore, the ship's people bringing the 100 measures of wheat from each ship, and meanwhile, blue angels are refilling the holds of the ship with grain from heaven. But those are lesser legends about Nicholas. The most famous legend of St. Nicholas relates to an event which purportedly happened in his lifetime, although, again, the earliest written account of it we have is in the 8th century, so 400 or so years after his death. And it's called the Charity of St. Nicholas. And here is it from the Golden Legend. After the death of his parents, Nicholas began to consider how he might make use of his great wealth, not in order to win men's praise, but to give glory to God. At the time, a certain fellow townsman of his, a man of noble origin, but very poor, was suffering from the terrible complaint of having 3 daughters. And daughters need a dowry to make a proper marriage. And he couldn't afford to get them married. And they were, he was afraid that they would go on the game. When the saint learned of this, abhorring the crime, he wrapped a quantity of gold in a cloth, and under the cover of darkness, threw it through the window of the other man's house, and withdrew unseen. Rising in the morning, the man found the gold, gave thanks to God, and celebrated the wedding of his eldest daughter. Not long after, the servant of God did the same thing again. This time, the man, finding the gold and bursting into loud praises, determined to be on watch so as to find out who had come to the relief of his poverty. Some little time later, Nicholas threw a double sum of gold into the house. The noise awakened the man, and he pursued the fleeing figure, calling out, "Stop, stop, don't hide from me," and ran faster and faster until he saw it was Nicholas. Falling to the ground, he wanted to kiss his benefactor's feet, but the saint drew away and exacted a promise that the secret would be kept until after his death. And this produced an enduring symbol, because bags of gold, how do you draw a bag of gold? Well, the answer in art is draw a gold ball. And so if you see a picture of a bishop holding 3 gold balls, it's Nicholas. So 3 balls in his hand, the gold, that's St. Nicholas. In fact, you don't even need the bishop there. A mitre and 3 gold balls, and you know this window is in honor of St. Nicholas. Now, Nicholas is already the patron of seafarers. But the story about the dowries made Nicholas an obvious patron, the saint who looks after your guild, your association, the guy you pray to for your business, for the guild of pawnbrokers. And you say to yourself, what's a pawnbroker? And you know those shops where you take something to them and they will give you a loan in exchange for your watch or your gold ring or something. And you've then got the money and you can redeem the item. That's a pawn shop, and they are pawnbrokers. And you can recognize a pawn shop when you see one, especially in England, because they'll have 3 brass balls hanging outside because they belong to the Guild of Pawnbrokers and they recognize their patron saint as Nicholas, and they put his symbol outside. Now, Nicholas is, why does the fame of Nicholas spread so wide? You've got fishermen and they travel, and so his reputation is spreading around the Mediterranean, and pilgrimages, voyages are made to his tomb, to the shrine of Nicholas. But the town of Myra gets sacked by a Muslim army, the Abbasid troops under Caliph Harun al-Rashid in 809. And what was a prosperous town falls on rough times. And it went into a decline after that sacking. And then 200 years later, it becomes part of the great Seljuk Empire. So it's under Muslim control. Now, these Muslims respected the tomb and allowed pilgrims to visit. So pilgrims were still going to the tomb of Nicholas until 1087, when a bunch of Italian sailors not only visit the tomb, but they broke into the tomb and stole the remains of Nicholas and took them back to their own country. They took them back to Bari in Italy. So that's why that photo of the tomb you can see there has the side of it bashed in, because they stole Nicholas's bones and they took them back to Italy, and they built a massive great church over them, the Basilica di San Nicola. And in the bottom, in the crypt of this church, there is the tomb of Nicholas. And it probably had a different form in different periods. Here it is depicted in 1425. And you can see sick people being taken to touch the tomb, because the reputation of the saint is so great that people are healed by touching Nicholas's tomb. So the Basilica of San Nicola becomes a major pilgrimage center. Above his tomb, they have a silver lamp burning, and you can see that Nicholas, as a patron of seafarers, is still there in the shape of the lamp, which is shaped as 2 boats. And you can buy a copy of the lamp to burn at home and to pray to St. Nicholas. And not only that, from Nicholas's tomb, water oozes. And this water is considered to have miraculous properties. Now, that water, which they once commonly called oil, or the mana of St. Nicholas, comes from the tomb, is not terribly surprising when you see how close the basilica is to the sea. And of course, the crypt is down the bottom. So rising damp is enough of an explanation for this. But the water was bottled, and it was always put in bottles that had the image of St. Nicholas on them. And so for hundreds of years, these are sold to the pilgrims, and they go all over Europe. You'll find them in archaeological digs and all sorts of sites, and you can recognize the mana of St. Nicholas by the image of St. Nicholas on the bottles. And if you're sick or suffering from something that you think intercession of St. Nicholas will fix, drink the water, sprinkle the water, apply the water. I'm not quite sure how, but again, miracles worked through the power of Nicholas. And then you get something that happens in devotion. And I reckon this is largely because mothers explained, children ask their mother, who is that saint? And their mother sometimes comes up with a story explaining to the satisfaction of the children. So you get something like a child says, who's that saint there holding 3 oranges? And the mother reads Sanctus Nicholas and says, that's St. Nicholas. Oranges, he must be from Spain. And so you get that story. And the coat of arms of Nicholas is simply 3 gold balls on a blue background, probably because of the maritime connection. But maybe somebody misinterpreted the 3 round gold balls as 3 blonde heads, because you get yet another legend emerges. And again, I think you can hear mothers telling off children who wander off and forget the time. 3 small children were gleaning in the fields. As they worked and prayed and played, they wandered off into the town. Walking about and exploring, the children forgot the time. When it was late and the sun was going down, the children were hungry, tired, and lost. They came to a lighted butcher's shop, knocked and said, we are lost and hungry. May we eat and sleep? Oh, yes, came the reply from the evil butcher. Come in. As they entered, the butcher takes a sharp knife, cuts them up, and puts them in a large salting tub. 7 years pass. A knock comes on the door. Bishop St. Nicholas appears, saying to the evil butcher, open your large salting tub. The saint puts his hand in the tub and appealing to God, says, rise up, children. The little children awake and stand up. Their families joyfully welcome them home. I'm not quite sure how that 7 years works, because their parents wouldn't be too happy. But ever since, Nicholas has been the patron of children because of this legend. And his feast day is still the 6th of December. And because of the story about the charity of St. Nicholas, he's associated with gift giving. So children and gifts. And there's another legend where Nicholas intercedes to save 3 innocent soldiers. And again, I think you can even see in that picture the 3 blonde heads of the soldiers who are about to be beheaded when St. Nicholas appears and stops it happening. And I think it's another backstory legend based on his attribute. Then we get something go viral. There's an author. He's the Archbishop of Genoa, a guy called Jacobus de Voragine. And he combines into a really handy pair of volumes for preachers what he calls the Golden Legend, readings on the saints. And it's a collection of really good stories for sermons, lined up by day, and it gets used for preaching throughout the medieval church, and it's one of the most popular religious works of the Middle Ages. And because he's Archbishop of Genoa, he's particularly in favor of Italian saints. And one Italian saint that he gives a lot of time to is Nicholas of Bari. But of course, Nicholas of Bari is actually Nicholas of Myra, except... So here in the Golden Legend, here's a copy of the Golden Legend from the 13th century, and you can see the start of the story of Nicholas there with that elaborate N, and there's the picture with the evil butcher and the 3 young children being raised by Nicholas. So Nicholas becomes a very popular saint. So when should you pray to Nicholas? Well, if you've been imprisoned, or if you're against robbers, or if you're a chemist, or if you're an archer, or if you're a baker. He raised 3 boys in a barrel, so he's obviously, if you're a barrel maker. Boatman, that goes back to the beginning. I don't know why he's the patron saint of people who shine shoes. But patron saint of boys, of brewers, well, they use barrels, of brides, obviously because of the gold coming in the window, of captives, there's another story about that, children, dock workers, druggists, fishermen, grooms, judges, lawsuits lost unjustly. Again, you've got to read the Golden Legend to understand that. Longshoremen, maidens, mariners, merchants, penitent murderers, newlyweds, old maids, parish clerks, paupers, pawnbrokers, we talked about that, perfumers, pharmacists, pilgrims, poor people, prisoners, sailors, scholars, spinsters, students, penitent thieves, travelers, the University of Paris, I don't know why, unmarried girls, that's obvious, and the Varangian Guard, I don't know why, and watermen. There's another St. Nicholas miracle story of the boy that falls overboard the boat, and they fear he's drowned and lost, and then Nicholas brings him back to his father, complete with a cup that he was chasing when he went over. So Nicholas is insanely popular in Europe. And there's various countries that have Nicholas as their patron saint. And it's often port towns. So Liverpool, you'll see there in the list, Naples, Sicily, Amsterdam in the Netherlands, all of Greece, all of Russia. Nicholas is popular. Now, he's the patron of the city of Amsterdam. And Dutch people say Saint Nicholas in a different language and in a different way. They say Santa Claus for Saint Nicholas. And so there he is, the bishop with the boys in the barrel. That's him, definitely. Now, Amsterdam sends migrants to a city that was originally called New Amsterdam. It's changed its name now. It's called New York. But devotion to St. Nicholas went with the pilgrims to America. And American popular culture picks up the St. Nicholas story. And Americans always put their own spin on things, and creatives do things. So you might be surprised to hear that a poet called Clement Clark Moore strongly affects the image of St. Nicholas. In the 1800s, he writes this poem that became extremely popular. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there rose such a clatter. I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver, so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on, Comet, on, Cupid, on, Donder and Blitzen. to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount up to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. Now in this poem, these creatures are tiny. They're tiny reindeer and a tiny elf Santa Claus. So that's how he can fit down the chimney, because he's talking about very small things. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys was flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly elf. And I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know that I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprung up to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." So you've got this merry elf who's with a pipe and smoke all around his head, and he's small. And John, you might know this from England. Yeah, the things you put in the stockings at Christmas. One thing that the English always put at the foot of the stocking was an orange, because of course these are the gifts of Nicholas, and his symbol is the gold ball. Often nowadays they're a chocolate orange, and very nice too, I might add. So by 1900, Nicholas is got fur, but he's still small. He's small enough to put his head through a holly leaf. So he's a tiny St. Nicholas. And then there is a company who makes advertisements, and very good advertisements, who use the color red and white in their advertising. And so here's a 1931 advertisement. "My hat's off to the pause that refreshes. Drink Coca-Cola, delicious and refreshing." And so old Santa, busiest man in the world, takes time out for the pause that refreshes with ice cold Coca-Cola. And if you want him holding a glass of Coca-Cola, he's got to be big enough. So Santa is now larger and equipped with a red coat and with white fur and the white of his beard. And how he gets down a chimney now, I don't know. So this is my story that I've told you tonight about how a saint became Saint Nicholas, became Santa Claus, became Santa Claus. There was a holy Greek bishop living in Turkey called Nikolaos. Legends developed about him, devotion to him spread. His remains were translated, shifted, moved, effectively stolen. And through a whole series of, in a way, almost coincidences, popular devotion, artistic imagination, poetic invention, and advertising transformed him from an ascetic old bishop into a jolly little elf who then came back to human size and is now almost universally referred to as Santa Claus. Now, to be honest, there are other things that play into this legend and devotion. So there are pagan elements that come in, especially with the whole Father Christmas thing. But I'm going to tell you that Santa Claus was originally Saint Nicholas. And the wonder worker is the human figure behind the legend of Santa Claus. And when I told my fellow staff members that I was doing this story about Santa Claus and St. Nicholas, Sister Jane Macy, who is a very clever artist, decided that she should put me between the two of these figures because I think she saw some kind of resemblance. So that's my presentation. If you've got questions or want to react, now's your chance.